Kirk Cousins' discomfort in the Falcons offense continues. Can and will it get better?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, the illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can start a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So if you don't know me, guys, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka Mr. Consistency, aka Mr. AKA, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, formerly at FalcFans.com. RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen or first watch each and every day. And to become an everydayer, guys, all you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode is a all 22 review, where we'll be looking at the film from the Falcons' Week 14 loss to the Minnesota Vikings, talking about the defense, the tale of two halves, and how that's going to impact this team's offseason priorities on that side of the ball, as well as more complaining about Zac Robinson. And but let's first talk about Kirk Cousins, right? And I have not been as critical as Kirk Cousins as many of you guys want me to be. One of my issues is I do not enjoy the discourse surrounding the quarterback, the constant yelling at each other about the quarterback. You know, sometimes I'm a hater of said quarterback. Sometimes I'm an apologist of said quarterback. You know, basically I calls it like I sees it. And I haven't really been calling it like I see it with Kirk Cousins, right? I haven't called him out to the degree that I think a lot of you think I should be calling out. And you're asking why. It clearly must be I'm very biased or I'm blind or something like that. And it's mostly because, you know, I don't think Kirk is comfortable in this offense. And I feel like we've seen this happen before. And generally, because I've seen this happen before, I'm being a little bit more patient with Kirk to hope it figures it out. But obviously that clock is ticking. Now, this was something that a Locked On Falcons Insider pointed out to me. His name is Luke. Shout out to him. He pointed this out last weekend, talking about sort of the biggest issue with Kirk in this offense is sort of the timing within the offense. And I paid a lot more attention to this watching the film this week against the Vikings than I have in the past. And, you know, I think Luke is onto something where you're seeing that sort of hesitation with Kirk when he hits his back foot on his drop back and the ball isn't coming out with the rhythm, the timing that it needs to, right? When you look at some of his best throws that he had in this Vikings game, you saw the ball come out with that rhythm, with that timing. He hits his back foot, ball's out, right? But too often you're seeing those plays, and that, not just in this Vikings game, but over the last couple of weeks, where he's hesitating. He's not trusting what he's seeing. You're seeing the double clutching. You're seeing the double pumping and all that stuff. And that's when the mistakes start to happen. A perfect example of that was in the first quarter, where he threw that interception to Josh Metellus, the first interception of the game. And the Falcons basically ran the same Ohio concept that they ran last week against the LA Chargers. That was also intercepted by Tarheeb Still, the first interception that he still had in that game, not the pick six, but that first one at the beginning of the second quarter. And it was basically an identical play, right? They did slight tweaks, right? Last week against the Chargers, it was 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver sets. This week, it was 2 tight end sets out of 12 personnel, right? But that Ohio concept is basically where the outside receiver, in this case, Darnell Mooney, in both instances, runs the vertical to pull coverage away, while the inside receiver, Drake London, in both cases, runs an out-breaking route, right? And the minor adjustment this time was, rather than Drake London running a true out, he kind of rounded it off that made it look more like a curl, right? And you saw, just like last week against the Chargers, where that cornerback, Tarheeb Still in that case, fell off of the vertical route from Mooney to jump the throw that Kirk made to London on that out, and Kirk hesitated and double pumped on that ball. The Vikings corner did that. He was carrying it, and then he dropped off of that. And you saw Kirk hesitate, right? And because Drake, you know, was sort of rounding off his route, and again, I'm speculating on what was going on through the mind of Kirk Cousins. You know, he was thinking about Cole's cash or whatever was going on in his brain. But, you know, speculating on that, like, it seemed like he was trying to get Drake to work back over the middle of the field, and that's why he threw the ball where he threw the ball, right? Similar to kind of You could argue the interception he threw in the red zone last week against the Chargers, where he was expecting Drake to make a break for the back of the end zone and threw it up, and Marcus May picked it off. But all that to say, regardless of what Kirk was thinking, it was a bad decision, bad throw. Kirk has to be better, right? He has to dirt that ball. He has to throw it away. He has to learn how to live to play another down. And we've seen too many of these instant interceptions in these instances in recent weeks where he's forced things, right? Where he's, forced the ball in a bad situation, looking to make a play. Again, it's one thing when you do it on the fourth down with Derwin James picks that off in the final interception last week, where you need to make a play, you need to kind of force it in that situation. It's another thing where you've seen like this Metellus interception where it's on first down and he's forcing a throw, right? Now, we also saw the interception later in this game, just like we saw an interception against Tyrann Mathieu 4 weeks ago, where, it was just a bad ball. The interception in this game to Kyle Pitts against a cover zero blitz. Those are more forgivable. You want your quarterback to throw better passes, but, quarterbacks are going to throw bad balls from time to time. But basically, we want Kirk to be, to live to play another down. We want him to be Matt Ryan, right? And speaking of Matt Ryan, this is why I said I've seen this before, because you go back to 2015, in year one of Matt Ryan with Kyle Shanahan, you saw a similar discomfort, right? Matt Ryan struggled with a lot of red zone turnovers that year. He wasn't really trusting what he was seeing. And so that led to him kind of forcing a lot of throws to the only guy that he trusted to get open, given that he wasn't necessarily trusting the concepts that brand new offense that he was running was operating under Kyle Shanahan. And he forced a lot of passes to Julio Jones, right? And that led to poor play. And then you saw the following year, obviously Matt Ryan winning MVP year 2 of that offense, and you saw him a lot more comfortable, and it blossomed into thing. And so part of the reason why I'm giving Kirk Cousins a longer leash than probably many of you guys think he deserves is I'm hoping for something similar. Again, not expecting Kirk to play at an MVP level. I don't think Zac Robinson is going to be, the next Kyle Shanahan. More on that later. But, I think there is room for hope and growth for this offense in year 2. And, it's harder for Kirk to be exactly Matt Ryan because Matt Ryan learned very early in his career to live to play another down. He threw a bunch of picks in 2009. This is why I say, guys, at the beginning of the show that many of you guys skip when I say I've covered this team for a very long time. Like, I remember all of these seasons. That's why it informs a lot of these takes. It's not just gut reactions to what's just happened in the last couple of games that is informing all my takes. It's 15 plus years of watching film and watching the Falcons play that is informing these opinions. But Matt Ryan threw a bunch of interceptions in 2009. And that year he kind of really learned, okay, let's be more conservative. And frankly, my personal opinion, I think Matt Ryan was a little too conservative in the next 5+ years, right? And it's one of the reasons why the ceiling on the Falcons offense in those years was much, much lower, why they needed a player like Julio Jones and whatnot. But then you saw once Kyle Shanahan arrived, you started to see Matt Ryan sort of come out of his shell, being much more aggressive. That led to Matt Ryan having the best stretch of his career, that 2016 to 2018 year, right? That was a big factor in it. Another factor was that was also 2016 to 2019 was the healthiest stretch of Julio Jones's career as well. So that coincided well with each other. But getting back to Kirk, he's never really had, in my opinion, from watching him at Washington, watching him in Minnesota, that sort of conservative streak in the ways that Matt Ryan had, right? I think that's part of the reason why Shanahan loved him and McVay loved him from their days in Washington, because he kind of came out of the womb being a much more aggressive quarterback, even if he didn't have the physical skill set to warrant it. And that's why we have a chaos meter when it comes to Kirk, because it can cut you both ways, that aggressiveness. It can be very good, it can be very bad, right? But we need Kirk to sort of dial back down the aggressive. We need him to stop pressing. We need him to stop forcing these throws that are leading to some of these turnovers. And, that'll be, something that we'll see, will we see it? I guess. I don't know. Now, I'm not convinced that Kirk is going to magically get, comfortable in this offense in the next 4 games. But if he can be a little bit smarter, be a little bit more willing to take the foot off the gas a little bit, and with some of these aggressive throws and forcing things, I do think that will benefit this team greatly over these next 4 games, and they can stop turning the ball over as frequently as they have. The other reason why I'm not sort of hammering Kirk and nor am I eager to sort of pivot to Michael Penix is, I do think for this football team, it's in their best interest, not only from a football standpoint, but also financially, that they can get more out of Kirk in year 2. And he's successful, not only for these next 4 games, but also next year. that regardless of how this season is going to finish, there's going to be a lot more pressure on this regime to build on that success in 2025. And your best chance to do that is for this offense to once again be that high potent offense and be that potential top 5, top 10 caliber offense where we can have conversations about maybe, hey, Kirk's playing at an MVP level, like we talked about with Matt Ryan almost a decade ago. Now, we'll talk later about how the Falcons are going to go about fixing their defense, but you're likely going to see the Falcons invest a significant amount of resources in their defense at key positions this offseason. And given their limited resources from a cap standpoint, from a draft standpoint, there's going to be limited opportunities to really invest in their offense. They're basically, in all likelihood, with maybe a couple of exceptions, are going to run it back with essentially the same offense next year. And starting fresh next year with Michael Penix in that role, rather than being in that year 2 situation where you can build off of whatever success you have this year, I don't know if that's beneficial to this team. You're back to square one. Now, for me, if this team is going to be a playoff team next year and have a winning record and all that stuff, it's unlikely you're going to do that with essentially in that case, Michael Penix, a first-year starting quarterback. Now, many of you say, well, look at the success that Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels are having. And it's like, well, first of all, Bo Nix is being backed by a top 5 defense. That's a big reason why the Broncos are successful. Are the Falcons going to have a top 5 defense next year? And as we discussed on yesterday's episode, Washington, if they make the playoffs, it's going to be due mostly to their soft schedule, right? Based on the current standings, they have the second easiest schedule in the NFL so far this year. As we discussed yesterday, they haven't really beat anybody good. Their most impressive win was against Arizona back in week 4. And so while I think the case is easily made that for Michael Penix specifically, and certainly when we think about, potentially the next decade for this football team, starting the clock on Michael Penix starting games sooner versus later is definitely in his best interest. And certainly when we think about, where this team could be in 2032 and whatnot, it's probably in their best interest for that. But I think for this coaching staff, in terms of not necessarily being on the hot seat, although again, there's a give and take with this thing, how this goes, because if it's successful, the seat will cool down. If it's not successful, they'll be even on a hotter seat. But for this coaching staff to not necessarily be in a hot seat going in 2026, it's in your best interest for things to click for Kirk in year 2 so that you can build off of this season, right? So I'm not necessarily mad at this team at this point in time and this coaching staff doing everything that they can to try to salvage Kirk Cousins in this situation right now. And I don't think waiting Michael Penix and being patient with Michael Penix is going to ruin him long-term, right? We discussed that on yesterday's episode because it does potentially buy you another year to build up the supporting cast around him so that maybe by the time you do get to 2026 and Penix is the full-time starter, maybe you do have that sort of top 5 defense that, is supporting a guy like Bo Nix, and it can support Michael Penix like that in the future when he's, a first-year full-time starter and whatnot. So hopefully Kirk can clean up some of these issues. If he doesn't, that clock on starting rolling with Penix, they're essentially, I'm saying they're not going to really have a choice at that point in time. So I'm definitely aware of the Kirk issues, guys. Unfortunately for Kirk, he doesn't have the sort of equity that Matt Ryan had so that he can deal with these struggles. And people are like, oh, we'll be a lot more forgiving of Matt Ryan, given the success he had for this organization for many years before those struggles really sort of came in earnest in 2015, as well as 2009, when, his rookie year, having such an outstanding rookie year. So you could deal with some of those issues. But, unfortunately for Zac Robinson, the standard for him being the next Kyle Shanahan, that does raise expectations maybe a little too high for him. And that's why I want to talk more about the play caller and revisit that first interception and discuss why are we running the exact same play that didn't work last week, again this week. And that'll get us into a discussion of, many of the things that I think Zac Robinson can improve upon if he and Kirk Cousins or whoever is the quarterback next year can be on the same page. And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Today's episode is sponsored by Built Rewards. If you are a renter, listen up. This is a total game changer. Thanks to Built, you can now earn points on rent payments just like you do with groceries and travel. Paying rent now comes with serious perks and is completely free to join. Earn valuable Built points on your rent and everyday spending at no cost. Redeem points for flights, hotel stays, and even future rent payments. With over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels in their program, the possibilities are endless. Access unique experiences that are exclusive to Built members. Built makes it easy to turn rent into rewards. And so if you're already paying rent, why not make it work for you. Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNFL. That's joinbilt.com/LockedOnNFL to make sure you use our link so that they know we sent you at joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNFL. Don't wait. Start earning rewards today. So before I get into my issues with Zac Robinson, I do want to point out two things, right? We spent a lot of time on this specific podcast over the last 8 years talking about offensive coordinators play calling, right? When Locked On Falcons began in 2016, Alan Stark and I took over as the host after Thanksgiving in 2016. And so right after that point was the sort of the peak stretch of the Shanahan offense when it was really cooking in 2016. And then Alan left the show and I took over as a solo host in 2017. And we spent the next 2 years talking about Sark's play calling issues. Right, because we knew, if this team was going to reach the heights of 2016 again, it was going to be fueled by their offense, right? And we spent a lot of time in 2019 and 20 talking about Dirk Cutter's issues. And we spent a lot of time through the next 3 years with Arthur Smith, beginning in 2021, talking about his play calling issues. And so we talk about play calling a lot on this podcast because, this not so humble host, happens to think he's very informed on what good play calling looks like. So if I'm calling out Z-Rob, it's because I'm calling him out for similar issues that I called out Steve Sarkisian, Arthur Smith, and Dirk Cutter. The second issue I want to point out is the issue of scapegoats. And I think far too often, whether it's fans or media of this team in particular, they like to play the blame game. They like to focus on the individual person or player or whatever that is deemed the problem, right? Who's the guy that we got to fire, we got to bench, we got to cut, we got to trade in order to fix the problems, right? It's this belief of addition by subtraction. And my philosophy is, if you want to add, just add, don't subtract, right? And this sort of blame game scapegoat leads to a cycle where we tear down the guy that's ruining the team, and then we build up the guy, sight unseen, that gets replaced to him, and we treat that person as the Lisan al-Gaib, the Kwisatz Haderach, the prince that was promised. And then we build that guy up to basically be a savior because, the last guy was terrible. And then when the new guy is not the savior, right, we tear him down to be the savior. And that cycle repeats itself all over again. And no one has learned the lesson that there are no saviors. This isn't Doom, guys. This isn't Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire. It's football, right? There are no saviors. So due to that perception, I say all that because if and when I criticize Zac Robinson, I think because of that perception of you're only criticizing people because you think they're the problem, that people think I'm blaming Zac Robinson for all the team's problems. I'm not, right? As I said, I'm being critical of Zac Robinson because I think there are issues that he needs to get better at in year two that we saw all of these previous four predecessors, right? Kyle Shanahan got better in year two. Steve Sarkisian got better in year two. Dirk Cutter got better in year two. Arthur Smith got better in year two. So I fully am optimistic that Zac Robinson is going to be better in year two, but let's talk about the issues he needs to improve upon in order to be better in year two. And going back to the interception, the fact that we're calling the same play that 1 week ago did not work. We're just going to do it again. We're just going to run it back. And that gets us to my biggest gripe with Zac Robinson, the play action stuff, right? We talked about it. The team talked about coming out of the bye. Oh, we're going to increase the play action, right? And they have, right? Before the bye week, the Falcons were dead last in the NFL in utilizing play action this season, running it on 13% of their dropbacks. After the bye, with 2 games now, they're now 31st in the NFL in play action usage with 14%. So, to Zac Robinson's credit, against the Chargers, on the first 15 to 20 plays, they ran 2 scripted play action concepts. Both of them were outbreaking routes. We criticized him for that last week. This week against the Vikings, they had 2 play action concepts in the first 15 to 20 scripted plays, and they ran in-breaking concepts. So we went from 0 to 2. So as I said on Sunday, guys, hey, I'm encouraged by what I saw this past Sunday from this offense. So we've heard all about, and again, you're very familiar now at this point in time about how great Kirk Cousins has been historically in play action. It's talked about by the broadcasters every single week, all the under center stuff, all that stuff. And so much of the discourse this offseason is centered on, the lack of it in the offense because, well, there must be something wrong with Kirk. And I'm just like looking at these last two games, and I'm just like, I don't think the problem is Kirk. I think there's something wrong with Zac Robinson, right? And there was a lot of excitement this offseason with the marriage between Zac Robinson and Kirk Cousins, because based off of the play action, based off of the attacking in the middle of the field, Kirk was essentially, by some metrics, the best quarterback throwing over the middle last year. Zac Robinson comes for that Rams offense where Puka Nacua, and we talked about how Drake London was going to take on the Puka Nacua role, and we haven't really we've seen glimpses of it, but not really to the degree that we thought. But Puka Nacua ran the most years. It was a match made in heaven. It was a perfect marriage. And unfortunately, the marriage is not going great, which is leading to some of the discomfort issues that we talked about earlier. And, my concern is, seemingly the obvious basic stuff, talking about, play action, attacking the middle of the field, and some other things with Zac Robinson. One specific issue that happened in that week 1 game that we don't talk about when it came to, chipping a certain all-pro future Hall of Fame pass rusher. And hopefully we will resolve that issue this week when we face another all-pro pass rusher, Max Crosby. But like some of these basic things that, we complained about then of like, this is basic stuff. Why aren't you doing this, Zach? And it's like, to me, some of this play action, tailoring this offense to Kirk Cousins is kind of basic stuff. Why aren't we doing this, Zach? And so I went back today after my frustration to, and looked at the play action concept that Kirk ran in his last game, just one game last year from Minnesota. Again, it's a small sample size, but in that game, the Vikings ran play action on 38% of their dropbacks, 3 times as much as the Falcons currently do. And they basically had a route running over the middle of the field on like 80% of those plays, if not more. And Kirk threw over the middle of the field like 7 or 8 times, as opposed to 2 that we saw this past Sunday. And so to me, like, I'm sitting here going, like, if he can't tailor the offense around Kirk Cousins, it's in pretty basic ways, like, how confident are we that he's going to be able to tailor the offense around Michael Penix if and when he gets the opportunity to play this year, next year, whenever? And so, because part of me is worried, if I can be a prophet for a second, that we're going to get to a point at some point, in the next 9 months, we're going to spend a lot of time hailing Michael Penix as the Lisan Al-Gaib, right? And maybe, he will be. And I will have to sort of do a podcast where I'm like, he is the Kwisatz Haderach. But if and when he's not the savior of this football team, then you're going to start seeing some of the people saying a lot of the same things I'm saying now about Zac Robinson then. Because, again, the narrative was, oh, Michael Penix is going to be a savior. And when he's not, because there are no saviors outside of Patrick Mahomes, then people are going to suddenly start blaming Zac Robinson and, get rid of him. And again, the next offensive coordinator is going to be the savior. And again, that whole cycle repeats itself. But, in addition to the in-breakers that I want to see more of in their play action concepts, one of the other gripes that you've heard me say is like the Falcons didn't marry their run scheme to their play action concepts, which is what good offenses do. And that was one of my big beefs with Dirk Cutter, especially in 2019 when he came back. He had that problem too. Now, in Dirk Cutter's defense, his background wasn't McVay Shanahan offense. He wasn't a protege of those guys. Zach doesn't have that excuse. And so I sat here all summer thinking, I don't think the Falcons could lean on their outside zone run scheme because of Kirk's limited mobility, because the play action concept that you run off of that is that bootleg where you got the quarterback on the move. And we knew Kirk's mobility was going to be a concern. And if I knew that, they definitely knew that. So whether it's Zac Robinson, whether it's Dwayne Ledford, the offensive line coach and run game coordinator, they're going to have to make some changes this offseason. Now, we also need Kirk to get in the lab, get in the gym, get in with the trainer, and work on his mobility. And coming year 2 off of the Achilles, it should be better. We know that typically the second year coming off of that injury, you look better, you move better, but at the same time, Kirk is going to be 37. So it's not as if he's going to be suddenly, be out here, doing Michael Vick stuff or anything like that. But I sit here and I go, that's part of the reason why, like, I'm not sitting here, hailing, Michael Penix as the Kwisatz Haderach. And I don't know if he's solving these problems, but we'll just plug in Penix and these problems will go away. That when you look at some of the high level quarterbacks that are successful, basically without play action early in their careers, without play action being a significant part of the offense, and you look at those young guys, the list of quarterbacks that describes is basically Joe Burrow. That's the list. Everybody else, they're running play action as a part of getting their feet wet. And so, if Zach is just, saving all the play action for when Michael Penix takes over, it's like, all right, man, I guess we'll take it. We'll take what we get. But, we're making progress. We went, again, 0 plays last week to 2. Maybe this week we're going to get to 4. And who knows, by the end of the year, we might be getting to a rate that's comparable to what we saw from Kevin O'Connell's offense with Kirk Cousins last year. So they have been sprinkling in a couple of more different run concepts into the lineup, and whatnot. So it's like, okay, maybe we'll see. Maybe we'll see something. So we'll get there again. So when we talk about Zac Robinson next year, again, the point of this is I think we need to understand that if and when he makes progress, and the expectation is that will be a win, we need to understand where that progress is being made so that we can really evaluate what he's doing. But let's wrap up today's episode talking about the progress the defense did or did not make against the Minnesota Vikings. It was a tale of 2 halves. Great first half, terrible second half. And that's going to lead us into a discussion on the offseason moves that await, because many of this defense's holes were on display against the Minnesota Vikings. Now, guys, I know you're like me, and maybe your holiday shopping list is, let's say, far from complete. And if you are looking for some holiday gift ideas for that passionate sports fan in your life, try Ice Shakers. Ice Shaker is now officially licensed with the NFL, the NHL, NBA, NCAA, and Major League Baseball, and it's going to make the ideal gift. It's created by and used by the Gronkowski brothers. Ice Shakers have sold over 1 million bottles, making this the gift you're looking for. Go to iceshaker.com and use code LOCKEDONNFL at checkout, and you'll save 25% off your order. And maybe you're frustrated with the Atlanta Falcons and you want to get rid of Falcons memorabilia. Well, Ice Shakers are customizable. You can send their logo in, and their custom shop will customize your favorite bottle. Turnaround time on the custom bottles is 3 to 5 business days. So order your team braided bottles or your customizable bottles at iceshaker.com and use code LOCKEDONNFL at checkout for 25% off your order. Ice Shakers, show your support for your teams with the best branded workout bottles on the market. Ice Shakers. So talking defense, it was a tale of 2 halves. The Falcons were very good defensively in the first half, very bad in the second half, right? Minnesota's first half success rate was 27%. Their second half success rate was 74%. So on offense, typically you want, a success rate over 40%. That's generally acceptable offense. Ideally, over 50% is good offense. So, basically 27% success rate in the first half means the Falcons defense was very good. 74% in the second half means the Falcons defense was very bad. And despite the good defense, the Falcons still gave up first half points. And that illustrates my point about explosive plays that you've heard me make 1,000 times on this podcast over the years. That 10-play drive at the end of the first half illustrates that perfectly. The Vikings had a 10-play drive counting the DPI on Mike Hughes. They had 3 successful plays on those 10 plays, but they gained 79 yards on those 3 plays. 20 yards to Justin Jefferson, 47 yards on that DPI to Mike Hughes covering Jordan Addison, and then Justin Jefferson finishing it with a 12-yard touchdown. So even against a good defense, and of course the Falcons are not a good defense, but they've been playing much better. But the idea of how they played in the first half was what good defenses do. That's how you move the ball against good defenses, with explosiveness. So that's a point, just underlining that point that you've heard me make 1,000 times before. Now, the Falcons man coverage held up in this game until it didn't, right? The Vikings had a 20% success rate against the Falcons man coverage in the first half, 1 of 5. The one successful play was that 12-yard touchdown to Justin Jefferson, where he was able to beat D. Alford, thanks to the motion and getting some leverage on that. And then the Vikings had an 80% success rate against the Falcons man coverage in the second half, 4 of 5 on those plays. And the lone unsuccessful play where the Falcons did get a stop when they were man coverage was that 1 sack by Caden Ellis in the second half. And so why did the Falcons defense fall off? Partially, it was due to diminishing pressure, right? In the first half, I charted the Falcons getting pressure on 10 of Sam Darnold's 15 dropbacks, a 67% pressure rate. Second half, it was 4 of 19, so a 21% pressure rate. And for those of you, I think the benchmark for what is effective pressure is over 35%. So, in addition to guys getting open, Sam Darnold making some throws, Kevin O'Connell being able to attack the Falcons with some of the motion things that he was doing, the Falcons used some 3-man rushes, some drop 8 in this game. It was effective in the first half, right? 2 of their 4 sacks in the first half came on 3-man rushes. Second half, not so much. Their pressure was also effective early in this game, in part due to a good start by Arnold Egede. He was very effective in the first half, not so much in the second half. Part of that is owed to limited opportunities in the second half. right? He didn't play a ton of snaps because he was exclusively a designated pass rusher. They dropped him into coverage a couple more times in the second half, which part of those drop 8 coverages. And then a couple of times when he did rush, the Vikings did chip him due to the impressive start. So we need to see the Falcons feature him and Caden Ellis a lot more. They have been the team's 2 most reliable pass rushers basically over the last 2 months. I'm not a snap count scout like other people are, but we need to see more snaps for Arnold Ebiketie, and he's been growing very much into a difference maker for this team. He heard the slander from you guys that were talking trade back in October, and he's stepped up his game since then. So we know that the Falcons pass rush is going to be an offseason priority. As good as Arnold Ebiketie has been this year, and hopefully he continues to grow in year 4 as he has done from year 1 to year 2 to year 3 now, and hopefully into year 4. We don't want to be in a position where him and Caden Ellis remain their number 1 and number 2. Ideally, we'll be talking about those guys as the number 4 and number 5 guys, but we'll accept number 3 and 4 in that sort of pecking order next year, ideally, if the Falcons can add 2 better pass rushers next offseason. So we also know revamping the secondary is probably going to be a priority, and certainly that was on display against this game. After the pass rush, you got to think CB2 as well as starting safety are going to be number 2 and number 3 on their top 3 priorities in their to-do list. If the current standings hold, the Falcons will face the Vikings next year. And so will they have a cornerback that can cover Jordan Addison next year? They don't have one right now other than AJ Terrell, and he's too busy covering Justin Jefferson. So we'll see. Right. So we've talked about the revolving door opposite AJ Terrell, where he's had a different starting cornerback starting opposite him every single year that he's been in the league since 2020. That should change in 2024-5. I'm sorry. But hopefully that we'll see that same 2025 corner start in 2026, 2027, and beyond and whatnot. So, safety, Justin Simmons has not had the impact that we thought he would. And you don't want to see a revolving doors begin with that safety spot next to Jesse Bates, because Jesse Bates now has had 2 different starting safeties. Richie Grant, now Justin Simmons. Hopefully you nip that in the bud, right? And so I told the Locked On Falcons Insiders this on Tuesday. I expect edge and safety at this point to be free agent priorities. Then I expect, edge to be your primary target in round 1. I think corner is probably going to be your primary target in round 2. Now, obviously, things could change over the next 5 months, and we'll tweak that and whatnot. But, I think most of this team's offseason resources are going to be used on the defense, and that's why I think offensive continuity is going to be important next year, right? And so I'm sure many of you wondering, okay, well, Aaron, you've outlined this. Well, what about some of the others' needs? What about center? What about tackle? What about linebacker? What about tight end? What about wide receiver? And unfortunately for the Falcons, because they're limited assets, like a lot of those positions might get punted, right? Which is fine if you're winning games, which again is why these next 4 games is important. The Falcons win these next 4 games. That's why we're not checked out on the season, at least here on the Locked On Falcons podcast. Now, maybe you get that swing tackle in the 4th round. Maybe that's a center if you let Drew Dahlman walk, but it seems less likely that Drew Dahlman's going to walk. I thought Dahlman played an excellent game against Minnesota after, an iffier game against the Chargers on his first game back. But unless you get another early round pick, it's going to be hard to replace all these players if you're going to move on from these players, right? Maybe you get another early round pick from a Kyle Pitts trade, but if you move on from Kyle Pitts, you got to bring in someone to replace him at tight end. It's like, you're going to go all in on Kylan Granson or whatever, in free agency, I don't know. We'll see. And then if you're going to get a starting caliber tight end in draft, that's an early round pick again. So you're just going to trade Pitts for an early round pick to use it on another, so that's whole situation. So, this offseason, if the Falcons are going to successfully navigate this, they're going to need a very capable hand. And I know a lot of you guys are out on Terry Fontenot, but he's going to get an opportunity to prove himself to be very capable this offseason, if he's capable this offseason, right? That's where, to me, the Terry discourse over the last couple of years hasn't been on the mark, right? There's too many people that have been praising Terry Fontenot unfairly. I think there's been too many people criticizing Terry Fontenot unfairly, right? To me, the correct opinion on Terry Fontenot is he a good GM? We'll see. We'll find out this offseason. So we'll see on that. I have more thoughts on that, but that will be something that we'll save for the future. If you want to get more insight into this Minnesota Vikings game and see the actual film that I'm talking about on this podcast, you can become a Locked On Falcons Insider by joining the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. You'll get access to the extended all 22 review. These have consistently been like an hour of film analysis from each of these games. So get that crisp, high definition, film analysis in your inboxes by hitting that link in the description below. You get 14-day free trial, so you can get this one, you get the Vikings one, and potentially the Giants one for free. And then, decide if you pay $4.99 a month after that point. And after that, you also get, in addition to extended all 22 reviews, you're going to get, my insights into live on game day. You can send me questions throughout the week. If you're looking for Christmas gift ideas for, small children, I don't know if I got you covered, but, if you feel like, my advice is beneficial there, hey, you can hit me up on that one. So become a Locked On Falcons Insider, guys. Continue to check us out. Make us your first listen. Tomorrow we'll be, of course, do a crossover Thursday with Locked On Raiders host, your boy Q, talking about Max Crosby and Brock Bowers. Are we going to be talking about Brock Bowers as the unicorn tight end, not Kyle Pitts? We're going to be playing against Desmond Ridder, Aiden O'Connell. All those are going to be topics of discussion probably on tomorrow's Locked On Crossover Thursday. Check us out. Continue to make us your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Locked On NFL, to get the lowdown on what's going on around the rest of the league. What's going on with Bill Belichick. Locked On Tar Heels, Locked On North Carolina. I don't know what the official, I think it's Locked On Tar Heels. What's going on with Bill Belichick at UNC. So go check that out. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.